What was God's response to Moses' plea for mercy on behalf of Israel? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Numbers on Walking Through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Numbers 14. We're going to be reading from verses 20 to 25. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Numbers 14, beginning at verse 20. Then the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word. But truly, as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. Because all these men who have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have put me to the test now these 10 times, and have not heeded my voice, they certainly shall not see the land of which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully, I will bring him into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valley. Tomorrow turn and move out into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. In our last lesson, we had discussed how God had said he was going to destroy Israel and make a great nation out of Moses. What prompted God to make this declaration? Israel accepted the 10 spies' report about the land being too difficult to take and refusing to take Canaan. God was fully justified in his action here, for Israel had rejected him. They had seen all of the miracles that he had performed. They had seen how he had protected them along their journey from Egypt. And yet now they thought that God wasn't powerful enough to bring them into a land that he had promised them. Personally, I don't know what they expected the land was going to be like. Perhaps empty or filled with a bunch of weaklings? But generally speaking, cities are fortified and the armies of nations are strong. That's how they keep the land that they own. But because of their rebellion, Israel deserved to be destroyed, yet God was still going to keep his promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He would just do so through Moses. However, Moses interceded on Israel's behalf and appealed to God's mercy and how God's reputation might be damaged among other nations if Israel was destroyed here. Could God have ignored Moses' plea? Absolutely. God is God, and Israel deserved to die just like we deserve to die when we sin. However, in this case, God heeded to the words of Moses and pardoned Israel for their sin here and wouldn't destroy them. This is yet another prime example that the future is not set in stone. Moses didn't have to intercede for Israel, and God didn't have to heed Moses. But God did, and for the reasons that Moses said. For those who claim that basically we're just playing out a script already written, passages like these throw a monkey wrench into that conclusion. Prayer works. It doesn't always provide us with the answer we want, and sometimes God does say no, but other times he says yes. However, unlike at Sinai, where only a portion of the people died after the incident with the golden calf, here there was going to be a greater punishment for Israel's sin. Because all of the earth was filled with God's glory, and because Israel had seen this glory, yet tested God 10 times and had not heeded his voice to come in, they would not see the land sworn to their fathers, nor would any who rejected him possess it. Now people come along and see statements like Israel tested God 10 times and try to see if there actually were 10 times that they rejected God. From our studies thus far, we saw Israel complain to God when they were trapped at the Red Sea, then when they didn't have water, then when they didn't have food. Of course, then they worshiped the golden calf, and then when they didn't have meat in the wilderness of Paran. And then here, when they didn't take the promised land. That's a total of 6 times. Of course, we could add how Israel cried out to God in Egypt before the arrival of Moses, and then when they complained to Moses after one of Moses' encounters with Pharaoh, but that only gets us to 8. Why did God say 10? Are there explanations? Well, of course, the easiest explanation is that we don't have all the times Israel tested God. Just as it is with the Gospels, every event of Israel's journey to Canaan is not recorded for us. So since we have seen Israel's habitual complaining, it is not too far of a leap to assume that there were 2 other instances. Another possibility is that God is counting different than we do. For instance, in Exodus 20, Israel feared the voice of the Lord and asked that God speak to Moses and that Moses then speak to them. Did God count this as a test? Maybe he counted the time when only the Levites stood with Moses on the Lord's side in Exodus 32. That would get us to the number 10, but sort of in a contrived way. But there is another solution. That God is using the number 10 here symbolically, meaning completeness. In the scriptures, we often see the number 10 used this way to represent something that is complete. God's anger with Israel was complete, so he was going to punish them. Which interpretation is correct? It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, so let's not be dogmatic over it. But if I was forced to give an opinion, I would lean towards option 3, as this doesn't require us to go beyond Scripture to find an explanation. Absent from God's wrath is Caleb, and by inference Joshua, the two men who did not rebel against God. They would see the promised land. God doesn't destroy the righteous with the wicked, and he does not do so here. What was Israel to do now? The next day they were to turn from Kadesh out into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea until the rebellious generation died out, at which time the second generation would come and take Canaan. We'll see Israel's response to God, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Numbers 14, verses 26 to 38, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.